My name is Justin, and I'm an addict. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I'm sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to the RICO 12 speaker meeting. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust, and sex, food and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing this meeting in recording podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience in a future meeting, please go to www.reco12.com. That's RECO12, like recovery12.com, to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. RICO 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the costs of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to reco12.com/support, or you can click the link to the PayPal in the chat of the live meeting or in the show notes here. I'll get those posted here in just a minute. When you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 49. If you missed last week's conversation between Heather B. and myself, or any other meeting we have done previously, you can listen to them in podcast form by searching for RICO 12 Speaker Meeting Podcast on virtually any podcast platform you listen to. Or you can go to the RICO 12 website and find it under the link podcast. One more word about our speakers before we introduce today's speaker. When we line up a speaker for a meeting, we ask them to seek guidance on what and how to present so that they can reflect the light they have been given from their higher power. That light will inspire hope, meaning, worth, and growth in each of us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Kelly T., whose topic will be From Chronic Despair to Hope. Now, Kelly T. is a recovering addict and alcoholic who spent more than 27 years cross-addicted to drugs, alcohol, and food. At the worst of her addictions, she lost her children, ended up homeless, and supported her heroin and meth habit with prostitution. Thanks to her higher power, 12-step recovery, and the fellowship of the runes, she has been given a new life and has been sober for over 4 years. That's awesome, Kelly. The floor is now yours. You can take it away.
Thanks. Thanks for having me and inviting me to come on. I love talking about recovery because for so many years, as I struggled in my addictions, I didn't know there was such a thing as freedom one day at a time from this thing. It was always just such a part of my life. So when I get an opportunity to share my story and to share hope, I love and feel privileged to be able to do that. So thanks for inviting me. So my name is Kelly. Right now I live in Utah. I'm in Riverton, Utah, but I grew up kind of all over the place. And I'll just give you sort of a little brief, of who I am. I'm 46 years old. I have 5 children, 3 that I placed for adoption at birth that I am working on relationships with now and have a little bit of a relationship with them, and 2 daughters that I raised. And let's see, I was raised in an LDS home, and my family was active in that church until I was 13 years old. For me, I'll just give you my addiction history. My very first drug of choice was food. And I was really totally unaware that I was a food addict or what addiction meant at 7 or 8 years old. I didn't know. But I had a tendency to be really very anxious and struggle with some mental health concerns that they really weren't very clear on what all that was or what was happening with me. It just looked like I was maybe a very sensitive kid. And so, with struggling with anxiety and some depression, I turned to food, and food was my best friend. Food and TV together, actually. I can remember holding on to a lot of anxiety at school and then coming home and binging on food. And that worked for me for a while until I found drugs and alcohol as a young teenager and picked up alcohol. And everybody, shares maybe a different experience, but for me, I truly believe that I was an alcoholic the very first time I drank alcohol. Like whatever that was within me either came alive or just recognized it. Like the disease literally just snapped right in. I took that first shot. It was tequila, and took this first shot of alcohol, and it coursed through my body. And for the first time in all those years of dealing with these mental health concerns, for the first time, I felt calm and I felt okay in my skin. And that feeling was so addictive because it was like, I'm okay now. And so that first time I drank so much. I gave myself alcohol poisoning. I ended up at the police station. I mean, it was this very dramatic night. And I can remember my sister, after having to take me home and bathe me, to clean me up and put me in bed, that I was laying in my bed, this little kid really, and still the room is spinning still. And I have my hand on the wall trying to still the room. And the thought I'm having is that I cannot wait until I can do this again, and that is not a normal person's reaction to a night like that. But that was my reaction. That chemical, that alcohol was so powerful that I knew instantly, this is the solution to my life. And it was a spiritual experience for sure. And I kind of went on the sort of on the hunt to then find the friends who had the drugs and alcohol and all of that. And that really became my life as a teenager, a really outrageous behavior. It came along with very promiscuous behavior. I had, some early trauma in my teens. And so that kind of fed into that. And so I had this really vicious cycle going of drugs, alcohol, promiscuous behavior, just feeding into this machine that told me, I was not lovable. There was something wrong with me. I was broken. And then I had all this evidence to then prove that, right? Because I was this wild and crazy teenager. And that went on into my marriage. And I got married in my early 20s. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity to really get my life together. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a good mom. I am going to quit using drugs and alcohol. I mean, I really, really meant it. Like really, really, the essence of who I want to be and the desire of who I wanted to be was a good wife and a great mother. I mean, this is what I wanted. I did not want to be distracted with drugs and alcohol. But when you took the drugs and the drugs and alcohol were away from me in those early years, for the most part, like when my girls were babies, I had them back to back. And when they were little, my mental health problems became a major problem. And I ended up being hospitalized again and again for attacking myself with razor blades and having to be stitched up. I mean, I did not know how to live without drugs and alcohol, which kind of blew my mind. People were saying, well, here you are, you're not doing drugs and alcohol, your life should be fine. And that was not my experience. My life was not fine. The drugs and alcohol were gone and I was a mess. And I just thought, well, I'm sort of damned if I do and damned if I don't. And what do you do at that point? If, there's no way to really live. And it started to feel very hopeless. And I'm wanting to be this good mother, but I didn't see the avenue of how to do that. I didn't know what to do at that point. And I'm getting just more and more miserable. I'm gaining weight because, I've got food, I can do that at home with babies. So here I am putting on weight. And at my highest, I was 300 pounds. So very miserable in my own skin. And there was inevitably a breaking point in this whole trying to hold my life together and just sort of sneaking in, these things I could do where, I ended up, after trying to make things work for about 9 years with my husband, I ended up leaving him and being a single mom. And really, again, I'm going to do this clean and sober, but it didn't take long for me to completely unravel. And, at that point, my meth and alcohol use was really out of control. And in my late 30s, I found heroin. So you add heroin to the mix, and yeah, it was over very quickly. So within 2 months of me finding heroin, I lost my girls. Basically left them at my sister's house. My two teen girls, they were 13 and 15 at the time, and then went out onto the streets of Salt Lake City and began to just left my entire life behind. I really just basically packed a bag. I was so desperate for the drugs. I knew heroin had me so fast. I mean, and if anyone's ever faced that dope sickness, they understand you will do. And we basically trade our souls for it. That's what we do out there. And so I went out onto the streets, and, for someone who had decades of experience in the drug world, and I was really caught off guard and not prepared for life out on the streets. Just was not prepared for it. Hadn't grown up in it and wasn't prepared for it. So had some really just obviously terrible experiences. I got more and more isolated from my family, and of course grew more and more hopeless. So I had been exposed to 12-step recovery throughout my whole life, in and out of the rooms of recovery, really trying to find a solution. I don't know. I think there were maybe times I was just trying to feel better. And there were times maybe I thought I could get the drinking and drugging under control. Like maybe that's what 12-step recovery was about. But I watch people in these meetings and think and talk about their higher power. And I just thought, there's no way that this is how these people are doing this, or they must be broken in a different way than me, because that wouldn't work for me. And while there were times I got sponsors and sort of tried to work the steps, my heart was never really into it. I could show up and do work, but I couldn't really have faith in a higher power. And I definitely wasn't going to surrender my life to any idea of a higher power, even though there was this part of me that sort of believed and sort of desired. It wasn't enough for me to stick it through long enough to actually grow any real connection with a higher power. So over those years, I would say I grew angry at the idea of a higher power as the years went on, and as life was so difficult. And, I just thought I was wired to be an addict from the beginning, and it just felt like such a setup. And here I want to be this person. I don't know how to be this good mom. I don't know how to be sober. It doesn't work for me when I'm sober. I feel like dying when I'm sober. And so I thought, if there's a God out there, he's a monster. Like, he is cruel. He is cruel, because this isn't fair. I knew there was biological aspects of what was happening. So I didn't know how to reconcile that with these ideas and these rules of these are the commandments. These are things you're supposed to do. And I'm like, well, I didn't know how to live in that world. It just didn't make sense to my brain. Obviously out there, really any mental illness I had was really, exacerbated by the drugs. Meth in particular has a way of bringing out, hallucinations and paranoia, and really affects you terribly. And then you're adding, real life trauma and real life bad people into the mix. And it's a disaster. But something really amazing started to happen. And I can't believe I will use the word amazing in those circumstances. But as I became and grew more desperate, and as I began to have what I would call spiritual experiences, but more on like the negative side, and beginning to understand and see that there was actually a real true darkness, that there was much more going on around me than just the temporal world, that I began to understand that there was like a legitimate fight for my soul. And I hadn't really ever considered that in a very realistic sense. I hadn't ever, I thought, well, maybe there's a part of me that kind of always knew there's good and bad, but like out there, I understood like there's and it began to open my mind, I think, to the spiritual things. And I also had a couple of really beautiful spiritual experiences where I understood there was light and dark. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because then I started to, I'm living in these hotels. I am a prostitute, so I'm in very dangerous situations a lot. I'm dealing with drug dealers who are worse than my clients were, and dealing with other drug addicts who will, steal your drugs and help you look for them. And I mean, it's just this, nothing adds up to what it should. You're around people who are liars and cheaters and violent and all of that, and you start to get a little bit warped. But in that situation, beginning to see sort of the spiritual world around me, I began to sort of pray, I guess. And I remember just kind of saying, God, if this is ever going to get better, like, you're going to have to make me willing. Like, I'm willing to go through whatever it'll take to make me willing, but I'm so sick in my disease, I don't know how to be willing. But it was like I had this seed of willingness to have him make me willing. And I remember really holding on to that idea that, I don't know how to be willing. Like, I'm out here in the worst of the worst, being abused and just the whole facing sickness, that dope sickness all the time, and everything that comes along with being in that situation, which is so exhausting physically, mentally, and spiritually. It's so draining. And here, I don't know what else could possibly happen to make me willing, but I knew God had to do more. And he did over an 18-month period of me sort of staying in this place of like, I don't know how to change, but I'm willing to go through whatever it'll take. I find that, when we want to change and we keep at it and ask him for that, and we're willing to go through it, he can deliver that willingness. And thank goodness I was still alive when that moment came. I'm so grateful to have survived to the point where I finally felt some true surrender. And I wish I could describe in this 25-minute period that I have to share this part of my story, what that exactly looked like. I think it's different for each of us. I think God knows what each of us needs. Our higher powers know for each of us what actually is the tipping point that finally makes the pain of the problem become less than the pain of the solution. I didn't want to look at the solution. I didn't want the solution. And he had to help me finally make the pain of the problem big enough. And it certainly took a lot. And it was a very spiritual experience. I found myself ready to unconditionally surrender to my higher power. And as soon as that feeling and that thing broke, it was like something broke in me where I was like, I just don't care. I don't care if I sing like a religious zealot. I don't care what I have to go through. And I had to accept, that recovery is a 24-hour-a-day thing. Like, I always wanted to come into recovery and decide to be sober forever. And it was like, I got too anxious about it all. Like, I was like, I need all the solution now, here today in my day. And I was like kind of demanding of God before that, like, you've got to give me all the solution today. I have to have all the hope today. I have to have all the answers today. I have to just be able to decide to stay sober forever today. And it just, at least in my experience for my recovery, it doesn't work that way. So part of what I had to accept was his rules. His rules are, this thing's going to happen a day at a time. I'm going to allow you the strength and give you that strength, if you have enough faith, to be sober in this 24-hour period. But these are the rules. These are the rules that we're going to do this a day at a time for the rest of your life. And he's teaching me something in that, because I'm the most impatient person on the planet. I want instant gratification and I want to do this thing my way. And he's like, no, I'm giving you these guidelines. I will help you, but here's the deal. And part of that deal is accepting this is done 24 hours at a time. Another part of that is I have to work the program. I have to show up and I have to work my steps. I have to have a sponsor. I have to have sponsees. I have to go to meetings. I mean, that is just the deal, right? It's not as though like I do these things and then he's like, okay, now you've earned it. I don't ever earn my recovery. But there's a deal for sure between me and my higher power. He wants me to at least show up and try to do my 1%, even though he's carrying the load. And I think once, like in my unconditional surrender, where I was finally like, I'm willing to play by your rules, and I'm willing to come in and do this thing. I watched Heavenly Father, who I call Heavenly Father, show up in my life in very conspicuous ways. So here's this God that I spent a lot of time mocking. I was the queen of telling the baby Jesus jokes. I mean, I mocked God and just was so angry for so long because I thought he doesn't care. He doesn't really care. He's not. And even if he's real, like he just doesn't care. So I didn't have any respect. And I watched him, like almost could feel his excitement when I finally gave him enough humility and enough surrender and enough faith so that he could finally show me what he'd been wanting to show me all along after these like nearly 30 years of acting out in my addictions. Finally, he's like, Kelly, I've been waiting for you so I could show you what's possible. And a lot of that was mind blowing, to say the very least. I found the whole experience totally mind blowing to find out that there is a loving God who knows everything, who knows the details of the details of the details of my life. And that was ready and willing to like not hold my past against me and to literally redefine me through his love and through his eyes. And I had been labeled by the world, as addicts. We're so labeled. We're fat. We're, junkies. We're hookers. We're whatever, you put the plug in the word there. We've all faced this drug addict, dirty drug addict, homeless person. That's not who I am. That's not who I am. Those are some labels that were given to me by the world, but I have labels now through my higher power that totally redefine who I am. And these struggles, I would say, in my life now, being an addict in recovery, a food addict and a drug addict, an alcoholic, and, I'm certain I will find out at some point. I have a sneaking suspicion I dealt with codependency, so that'll be one. It is what it is. But these are the weaknesses that keep me really close to my God. These are the weaknesses, like without these struggles, like without me having to turn to my higher power literally on a daily basis in such a way, I'm the type of person who would be like, I'm good. I got this. I don't need my God. I got this. Who needs God when I can just do my thing and it's fine. So I find myself really grateful to be an addict in recovery. I like who I'm becoming. I like working steps and figuring out kind of like discovery, like what are my character weaknesses? I have a lot of them and I'm working on, but I have a lot that I've discovered that I've been able to now change and let go of and work on, like with God's help. Like, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is actually improving. I can see this pride or selfishness or self-centeredness for what it is, and it improves. There was no improvement in my life. There was no growth for all those years. Really, truly. I was a victim, just right here. I was a victim, and I would tell everybody around me how much of a victim I was of my life. And if someone didn't get on board with that story that I told, then I didn't have any time for them. I needed people to feel sorry for me. And luckily, I'm free from that prison today. I get to take responsibility for myself. I get to learn what it is to be honest. I was a liar, didn't see myself that way. I was extremely judgmental and thought I was this very open-minded, loving person. No, I had a sweet side to me that I would be sweet to get what I wanted, for two very different things. And I've learned to see these things and to work on them. And so I'm so grateful for that. And I know I talk about hope. The hope for me in recovery was finally identifying that I did not hold the power to save myself from this disease. the hope came when I finally put that responsibility to the only person who can, which is my higher power, which is Heavenly Father, the only one who can do it for me. Once I did that and shifted it and surrendered into his rules, then finally it was like a whole new world. And I'm stubborn. I'm grateful that I was alive when that breaking point happened, even though I continued to surrender in new ways all the time. That main breaking point happened here on earth, and I'm glad for that. So
thank you so much, Kelly. I really, really appreciate your vulnerability, some of the experiences you shared. I took down several questions that I'll be asking. We'll also have questions come in from the live audience, and a reminder to the live audience, if you have questions for Kelly, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. It looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other, and we'll get to those questions as they come in. Kelly, before we move into that Q&A section, do you mind taking about 60 seconds or so and sharing about the fellowship or fellowships you attend and how they help you?
Yes. Yep. Sure. So, first of all, I'm a member of AA, and yeah, that's probably, I would consider that my main hub of 12-step. I love to attend my church's ARP meetings, so the Addiction Recovery Program for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and have found, have really great connections in that program. And I love that as an additional support to my AA program. And for the food addiction, I found recovery in we call it FA, but it's Food Addicts in Recovery is the name of the program. So those are my main.
Awesome. And I'm glad you shared that. And it sounds like you gained some great experience, strength, and hope through those fellowships. Awesome. All right. Let's get to some questions here. We have one that came in from our live audience here. T asks, what are some of your daily practices that keep you grounded outside of your support group meetings?
Oh, that's a good question. The first thing I do when I wake up is I have sponsor and sponsee phone calls. So twice a week, I connect with my sponsor in FA right away in the morning on the phone. And I do 7 days a week. I have short little calls with several of my sponsees right as we get our day going. And I find that jumping into service immediately in the morning, and it's like the first thing I do is I'm shifting and thinking about somebody else. As someone who tends to be really self-centered, that actually really, it has been great for my recovery. So, and so if anyone wants to take that idea and work that into how they work with their sponsees, I find that really powerful. Prayer, absolutely. I go through times where I'm better with quiet time and like a meditation, and other times where I'm not so good at that, but I know that it brings strength when I do that one. But for me, step work, when I'm working on a step, and let's see, I am in the literature quite a bit. I do like an Instagram page, so I'm always in the literature continually, daily. That really helps. And I also study the Book of Mormon. Is a really big part of what brings strength to me is my scripture study, specifically the Book of Mormon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Appreciate that, Kelly. Question that I have for you. Early in your talk here, you talked about how the first experience you had with alcohol was the solution for you. You had finally found this solution that made you feel like you were part of something. What is the difference between you finding that solution, having that spiritual experience, you even described it as that, as opposed to the solution and spiritual experience that you find in recovery?
I think with when I look back and think about the drugs and alcohol and how it was a Band-Aid. I mean, it did bring me for some time, like, I don't like joy or pleasure or escape. But what came along with that, the price of that, the reality of that was the feeling of impending doom. I knew there was doom coming with it. I knew I couldn't keep going like that forever. I felt the addiction progressing, and I watched myself continually crossing lines that I wouldn't cross. I wasn't going to cross. And like before you knew it, I'd crossed every line that there is to cross. And so it's like and in the end, like the drugs didn't even do what I needed them to do. I can remember at one particular time, I'm injecting heroin and meth mixed together in a really decent shot, and it didn't take the pain away. And I thought, it was the scariest feeling ever. I thought, what do you do when you mix heroin and meth together and it doesn't work anymore? The thought, it's like there's nothing else to go to at that point, and the fear. So now what I have is, how do you describe finally being connected to your higher power? It's light and hopeful. And instead of like my world getting darker and smaller, my world is getting brighter and bigger. That's the feeling, is like, I'm here where I am now, but like, I am excited for where I'll be in a month from now. And I'm excited about the life that comes after this life, even, like my world is just getting bigger and brighter instead of smaller and darker and scarier. It's like more hopeful, more growth, all of those things, even though like there are, I'm learning how to get through, gray days, and I'm learning how to deal with truly, an underlying anxiety disorder, and quite a bit of, for lack of a better term, character defects, but really broken thought processes that kept me really trapped inside myself. I still deal with the realities of life. I mean, quite a few, but still, even with all of that, the undercurrent now of my life is peace and hope for the future, instead of just like, just reacting using smaller. So.
I love how you talked about the hope for the future and being excited about that. I used to think when I first came into the rooms, hey, I'm going to go through these 12 steps, check, I'll be healed and move on and be happy for the rest of my life. Everything's going to be hunky dory and I won't ever have to think about things again. And I'm so grateful that in my walk, I have come across people. My first sponsor had 20 plus years sobriety. In this meeting and in other things that I do, I interact with people with 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years sober. And they're always saying, hey, Justin, more will be revealed. As you continue down this path, the light keeps getting brighter and brighter and more is revealed. And it's such a beautiful thing. I love that hope and knowing that I have not arrived and will not arrive. All right. I've got a couple more questions here that came in. One from an anonymous attendee live says, Kelly, thank you for your courage and willingness to share your experience, strength, and hope with us. You spoke a bit about surrendering. What advice would you give to someone who is learning to be more consistent at surrendering and being willing to be led by God?
I thank you for the question. I would go back to, because, surrendering can feel like this big sort of, I've got to do it all at once and I've got to do this perfect surrender. But when I come back into my day to day, so if I think about like my 24-hour bubble here that I'm living in, what is it that God needs me to surrender to just for today? So can I just for today surrender to my abstinence and my sobriety? Can I just try to do the next right thing and surrender into that? Like, what's the next right thing he's leading me to do? And I try to keep it small instead of really big, I guess, because big freaks me out. So, it really just does come down to just the next right thing and surrendering. Also, something else I would say is that it took some time, and I'm sure this will continue to grow for me too, but to develop trust in God. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I started doing it. I was really hopeful that like he was going to be able to do for me what I can do for myself. And I was really hopeful. I mean, I was dealing with major like logistical issues of like being homeless and stuff. So like, how is that going to all sort itself out? But over time, I've realized that when I let go of my ideas of things and I surrender into his will, then I'm less on the Tower of Terror from Disneyland and I'm more on the lazy river. Life is better. And he shows up. and his way's way better. But it took a little time to understand the back and forth of that. Like, if I trust him, his way is better. Not always the way I want, or sometimes there's a little like limbo period where I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, and I get scared, but then I can see he has a way. So I think another thing I would mention is that it just takes a little time to develop that trust, but really look for your higher power showing up for you, and even track it, because we have short-term memory. I think in this, we forget that, like, we had this amazing experience, yesterday at lunch, this amazing spiritual experience. We just move on with life and we forget, especially in gray days for me. I tend to think I've been feeling gray forever. And I realize, oh no, like, I had a really great week before, and so I just have to get through the moment.
Yeah. So Kelly, you mentioned tracking those experiences. How do you personally track those spiritual experiences so that you can come back and remember when those, when you don't remember?
I do mine on social media. So I share, that's usually where I do most of my writing. I share my story so often. I'm daily on there. So that usually ends up sort of being my journal. Yeah. But I know that, people keep journals in all different ways. So
awesome. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Another question from T from our live audience. What have been some of the most beautiful discoveries you have made in recovery that may encourage others?
Okay. Well, the first big discovery was that, so one that was really shocking to me was I was so used to the mental obsession of drugs and alcohol and food. So of that sort of, it's like, once the alcoholism or whatever snapped on in me, it was like I had this sort of feed machine turned on that always was trying to fill this void all the time. So it was like this, like if I didn't have my drug, I was white knuckling and just waiting and just surviving until I could use, always surviving until I could fill that void. So I call it sort of like this need machine. So one of the biggest, like, holy Hannah moments for me was when I realized that mental obsession can actually be quieted. I don't have to white knuckle my sobriety today. Food's a little bit trickier, and I deal with a little bit more of it sometimes turning on or it being noisier because I'm weighing and measuring my, one of my drugs of choice. I have to get in the ring with it, right? Where I don't have to get in the ring with alcohol and heroin, but in a sense, I have to get in the ring with food every day. And so but in general, like, I am living in a very peaceful state of mind without that phenomenon of craving and without the mental obsession. And that's miraculous. That's one of the biggest things. I think when people would share that, I didn't believe them. Because it had always been on in my brain. It never was quiet. So when it finally quieted, I was really amazed. That was the biggest piece of hope to me, was realizing I don't have to white knuckle. If I had to white knuckle this, I wouldn't be here. I couldn't do it. I could not and would not do it. Let's see, something else. My gosh, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there's so many of them.
That's okay. I want to follow up on the white knuckle. Well, I guess share my own little thing. I have learned in my own recovery walk that living in abstinence and even in sobriety, where I'm following the checklist, but I'm doing it because it's a checklist, is hell.
Yeah.
It's not worse than acting out, but the emotional weight on me is brutal and it's no fun. And there's no relief from it until I step into recovery and what you said, learning and trusting that I don't have to white knuckle it. Now, there are times when the white knuckles still appear sometimes, but if I just push through it and if I surrender through it, not push through it, surrender through it, I can live back in the happy, joyous, and free that's promised to us in the recovery material.
That's exactly right. I love that. Yeah, I really, really love that. Like, I'll have moments of, moments of temptation or moments of thoughts, but it's very different than the obsession where I can't keep myself from going there. It's just a different feeling. And they seem to be brief and just, go right on out. So.
Thank you. All right. I've got another question for you that in your talk, you spent a little bit of time talking around the word willing. And willing is one of my favorite words in recovery and in my spiritual life. What power do you find in the word willing, even though it's not this like rock hard, hey, we're going to press forward and get to this, go to war word? What power do you find in the word and the concept of being willing?
Well, what power do I find in it? Well, the thought that's coming to me is how, I for so long wasn't willing, but I wasn't willing because I didn't believe life was actually going to be better without my drugs and alcohol and my food. That's the thought. I was like, I didn't know how to be in it long enough to then see, oh, life actually is good. Like, what was life going to be like? Who would I even be? I had to get over the hurdle of the drugs and alcohol and heroin. And then I was facing a food problem. I put on 100 pounds in less than a year when I got clean and sober, and it was not going to stop. So I had another surrender to hit right after that, which was into food recovery. And I thought, really? Like, really? No flour, no sugar, and way to measure food, like on top of everything I've just given up, really? And I knew Heavenly Father was like, well, it's your choice. I mean, you could do this recovery and have this added piece or not. And I finally was just, I think I had such a great experience with the drugs and alcohol that I knew if I did this, that I was going to even be blessed even more. And so I think I hold on to that feeling with willingness. Is like, I had some big willingness hurdles to overcome. And so the little ones, I guess, sometimes, I get tripped up for sure on willingness still, but I don't know. I think, gosh, I'm not having to do those. I reflect on the willingness, the big ones that I've had in the past, but I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We have another question from our live audience. Dylan types in, was it hard to trust people around you during recovery as you're walking into recovery? Was trusting others hard?
Yes. It was really hard because the first thing was I had come out of really some abusive situations. So I had some PTSD, some severe PTSD. So luckily, the very first meetings I started going to were my church meetings, my ARP meetings. And I had this amazing, God literally put this couple in. I know without a doubt that God had a huge hand in putting me in this room with this beautiful couple who are still very dear to me today, and helped me during that process. While I needed recovery, but I needed to feel safe. Over time, as I opened up and grew my fellowship, it was still very hard to trust. Very hard. I mean, I had, lingering paranoid thoughts from the meth, and then also just such bad experiences with people. But as I trusted God, I realized, people aren't perfect. And my trust was in God, not in the people around me. But I watch him speak. In my meetings, God speaks to me through other people. I listen to them say the things I need to hear. And so it helps me understand he's playing a part in this, even in the relationships with the people around me. It's very scary to be vulnerable and to say these things that we've been holding on in ourselves, and to finally share that with people. But the value of taking those steps is worth it. And I think a lot of people who come in have that, right? Where they're really scared to open up. Maybe men more, even sometimes, not always, but maybe more because, socially they don't share their feelings in the same way that us we're taught to as little girls. And so, but I find, people with a little experience end up really being grateful that they've opened up and started to share the truth.
Thank you so much, Kelly. We have time for one or two more questions. Reminder, if you have a question, type it in the Q&A window at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get to that. My final question, before we wrap things up, is this. You talked about, I love this concept, sobriety forever versus sobriety just for today, one day at a time. As a newcomer into the rooms, into recovery, as someone who maybe just be considering, do I need to go into the rooms of recovery? That concept of I've got to be sober forever can be so huge and it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. So tell us a little bit more about your experience of that concept of sober forever versus sober one day at a time.
I remember hearing, one day at a time is such a big slogan, right? That we use in AA. So I've heard it my whole life, but I just thought, but like sober, like one day at a time, like forever just means sober forever, So it was really hard for me to click that thought, to really solidify the idea that really yesterday is gone and tomorrow does not exist. This is the special allotted time I live in, is in this 24 hours. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know. I don't even know if I'll be here. My access to God lives just in today. It's the only day I can do anything about. And we hear a lot of sort of cliche sort of sayings and things floating out there about it, but that's because there's really truly power in that for me. And it was an acceptance. Truly, I had to accept that. And I guess play by that rule is the only way I can explain it. That I wanted to say, hey, here I am. And guess what? Today I've decided I'm going to be sober forever. And I wanted to have that. And I decided I'm going to be abstinent forever today, with the food. For me, I wanted to, say, well, here it is. But no, I don't get that. I get it. I just get it today. So I don't know. Hopefully that answers that a little bit more thoroughly, but it's a key. It's key for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And my sponsor, I loved this phrase he gave me, and it was at a time when I came back and I was like, I'll be grateful when I'm done with this and can just go on with my life. And he said, I've got 20 plus years sobriety, and I've learned that I get to do this, not have to do this. I get to do this one day at a time, every day for the rest of my life until I'm safely dead. And that little phrase right there has just stuck with me. And at first I thought, well, that's hopeless. Yeah. There's nothing there. But now I get it and I grasp it. It's awesome. All right. One more question came in. Oh, actually, it's just a comment. You have both truly helped me for today. I feel great love from you both. Thank you. And that's from Dylan. Thank you, Dylan, for your attendance and comments there. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. I'll do a closing reading and then turn the time over to Kelly to say the third step prayer here and get us out of here. All right. Thanks again, Kelly. That was a great RICO 12 speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up. I invite the audience to keep coming back next week and every week after this. If you've not yet gone to rico12.com and submitted your email address so that you can get invited each week, get the unique link each week, please go to and get on that list. You can get there through rico12.com. So you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Next week, we'll be hearing from Jackie C., whose topic will be dynamic recovery, changes in recovery. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the third step prayer that Kelly suggested and will be giving. Have at it, Kelly.
Thank you. I absolutely love this prayer. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Kelly. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it. So work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through. through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground. I can still be found standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with the seal